recording going, and we do have some guests or some members of the public that I'm letting in. All right, we're ready.
All right, I will call the Planning Commission meeting of October 26th to order. I will start with reading my Zoom script. This meeting is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with State of California executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Zoom is being utilized for this meeting. In case of technical issues, meetings will be uploaded to the city website as soon as possible after this meeting. We will be conducting today's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. Planning commissioners and staff are participating from remote locations, practicing appropriate social distancing. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting by use of Zoom as noted on the city's website and is noted on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak to the Planning Commission may do so during public comment or may comment on agenda items during the discussion of each item and must be logged into Zoom. Anyone using abusive, vulgar, offensive, threatening, or harassing language, personal attacks of any kind, or offensive terms that target specific individuals or groups will be muted and removed from the meeting. Please do not abuse this new way to provide public comment. And with that, can we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. So I'll start with Commissioner Kelly.
Here.
Commissioner Fernandez.
Here.
Commissioner Burns.
Here.
Commissioner Dauch.
Here.
Vice Chair Ottinger.
Here.
And Chair Fritz.
Here.
So we have a full complement of our members tonight, Chair.
Excellent. We have no minutes to approve, so we'll move on to comments from members of the public on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if anyone from the public would like to speak on an item that's not on tonight's agenda, now is your time. Please raise your virtual or actual hand.
All right, and while I'm looking around the gallery, we have not received any email comments for items not on the agenda in the intervening weeks.
I don't see anyone looking like they wish to speak, so I will close public comment and ask if any planning commissioners have any conflicts of interest. And seeing none, we'll move on to our first regular agenda item, the local hazard mitigation plan.
Thank you, Chair Fritz. So we do have Jeff Breslin from Wood, the consultant who is helping us put this together. We're also joined by Chief Braga, our fire chief. Thank you, Chief. And we have Phoebe Golden, who is actually our Civic Spark Fellow working on our climate action with our Climate Action Committee is here tonight as well. Just to remind folks, we have been working throughout the last year or so, actually a year and a half, I think, on this draft plan, which is obviously as part of your packet tonight, but it is posted as well to the city's website on the fire station page. And on that, there is also a link for submitting electronic comments. So if you, after anyone in the public or on the commission who wants to submit comments after this meeting that you might think about or share that link with others, we'd really appreciate it. The local hazard plan will be does have a 30-day comment period that we're doing. And so again, the fire department's website contains both the documents as well as the link for submitting e-comments. And I do also want to note we did have a hazard mitigation committee of community stakeholders like the community center and the schools set up for this project. And we do have a couple of folks here from that tonight. Zach Dauch was the Planning Commission liaison to that group. And Chris Andrag is here as well, who was representing the communities, Sebastopol Cultural and Community Center. So I want to thank you both for your, and of course, Chief Braga as well. There were some other staff members on that committee, but we've got those three from our local hazard mitigation committee. I want to thank you all publicly for your work on that, making this happen. And with that, I will hand it off to Jeff.
Thank you, Carrie. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right. Appreciate everybody.
Or actually, Jeff, you are a little bit choppy. So if you're able to maybe take your video off, that might help.
Everybody's
It looks like Jeff is having a little bit of a connection issue. Let me just let him know via the chat, and maybe we can get that working.
Hey, Carrie, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Chief.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm having some video issues myself, but I'm glad that I'm coming through. Carrie or Jeff, were you able to see an email that came your way from Adam that the link did not originally work? The link is, he said, the one in the press release doesn't seem to work. Neither does the one on the website. Carrie or Jeff, do you see that?
I do see
Email.
that email, Chief, and I will send him a link from the Planning Commission, and maybe that he is on the.
Okay.
Yeah, I will send him a link to the meeting.
Okay, great. I'll
Thanks.
forward it to you. Thank you.
All right, Jeff, are you?
Okay, Carrie, I just sent it your way. We'll see how long it takes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right, so Chair Fritz, it seems like our consultant is having some connection issues. I don't know if we want to either take a 5-minute break or just go ahead and maybe swap the agenda items and go forward with the Calder Creek summary. And then once Jeff has worked out his issues, come back to that.
I suppose. Are you there, Jeff?
This is Jeff. Can you hear me?
Oh,
You seem like you're still kind of fading out, Jeff.
Can you hear me? Or it's
Keep talking.
that seems better. Yeah, keep talking.
bear with me. Are you able to see the presentation?
No.
We can't see the presentation, Jeff, but we can hear you now. So if you can email me the presentation, I don't know if Juliana already did that, but if you can email it to me, I can share my screen and you can just speak to it if that works.
My screen real quick. And then we'll see how.
Yeah, you're still kind of fading out, Jeff. I don't.
All that. Okay.
We can see your screen now.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see your screen, Jess. I'm not
I
sure
wonder if
you're
you
able
wanna-
to call in.
Yeah, I suggest calling in maybe using your phone.
Oh, and we did get Adam, so thank you,
Yeah.
Chief, for that.
A moment. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. And let's see. We can get the phone number here. Bear with me. Okay. Uh, I don't see a phone. Can somebody put that in?
Yeah, Jeff, I will put it in the chat, just a moment. Yep.
Okay. Let me try that. Bear with me a little bit more, please. Jeff Brislan. Okay, can
Yes.
okay, this is Jeff on the phone. Can you hear me?
Much better.
Okay, good. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. Now I just have to figure out how to turn down the volume on the speaker here. Just a minute. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on with the presentation, assuming everybody can hear. Appreciate the attendance today. What I have here on the agenda is just to go through a quick overview of the hazard mitigation planning process, how we got to this point, recap on the public involvement activities to date, but really want to focus on the plan and how it's organized, and particularly the mitigation strategy and how, and we'll touch on some of the new mitigation actions that have been developed for the plan by the planning team, and then we'll wrap up with next steps. And we'll have a question and answer period. My presentation should take about 20 to probably 30 minutes max. So. right, so this is again a live presentation. You can use the chat log to ask questions, and we'll try to, at the end of this presentation, address any of the questions that come through. And as a reminder, the meeting is being recorded. Just briefly with the introductions, Carrie already introduced herself and the primary point people at the city that were part of the planning effort. And I am actually filling in for Juliana Prosperi, who's been the project manager on this effort. She's unfortunately sick and couldn't attend tonight, but I've been involved in the process as a senior technical advisor, and I'm the hazard mitigation lead for Wood. And also from Wood is Adam Chen. He's an environmental planner out of our Sacramento office, and he'll be taking notes tonight. Brief recap of the hazard mitigation planning process in the Disaster Mitigation Act. Hazard mitigation is defined as any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to human life and property that's caused from natural or human-caused hazards. Mitigation is part of a 4-phase emergency management process, and it really encompasses, at its core, it's a key component of resiliency and being able to reduce damages and recover faster from events when they do happen. The trends that have been occurring in California and across the nation have been more population, more growth. That this, by its nature, exposes more people and buildings to hazards. But it seems like the frequency and the severity of hazards tends to be increasing. There's more disaster declarations, and this is resulting in more response and recovery costs at all levels of government. And the hazard mitigation planning requirement was initiated back in from the Disaster Mitigation Act 2000. It's codified in 44 CFR 201.6. So every community now is required to have one of these plans as a condition of receiving certain hazard mitigation grant funding from the federal government. But there's other benefits as well. We're trying to overall reduce costs of response and recovery. We know some of these events are going to happen. It's not if, but when. And we know that there's things we can do to guide planning and mitigation projects in a coordinated manner that will ultimately make Sebastopol more disaster resilient. And this slide shows a recap of the what used to be a 4-phase process that's FEMA has refined into kind of a 9-task steps process here. And we are in phase 4 of the process where we have a draft plan, and we are at the point of putting it out for the final public review and comment. And then we will also be pushing it forward to reviews at the state and FEMA level. And ultimately, the city will be adopting the plan. And then the kind of the final part of the process is to keep the plan alive, implement it, and create a safe and resilient community. The Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee is shown on this slide under the leadership of Carrie, Bill, and Daryl. The core planning team and the city departments that have been participating throughout this process are shown on the left top, and then the stakeholders of which there have been several that have been active participants through the process are listed there. And then the Wood team has been providing assistance through this effort to help facilitate the planning effort, document it, do some of the heavy lifting on the risk assessment, and really help just facilitate the process and pull the whole document together. This has been our overall project timeline, and as Carrie mentioned, we officially kicked this process off a year ago in October, and we've had a series of 4 hazard mitigation planning team meetings, which has gotten us to this point of having the full draft plan. So we're kind of on the home stretch here of the planning effort, where we will be submitting after the 30-day public comment period. We'll be submitting the plan for a state and then FEMA review period, which once that plan goes through and is approved by FEMA, then the final step will be adopting the plan. And that will probably be in the early part of 2022 by the time it gets through the state and FEMA reviews. A quick recap on public involvement, which has been which is a requirement of the Disaster Mitigation Act. And we did this in part through a public survey. And this was actually back in January. We had 137 responses. Majority of these folks live within the city limits. And among other things, we did poll the public kind of what the hazards were that caused them, should, from their perspective, should be, a high priority in this plan. And not surprisingly, given recent events, wildfire rose to the top, climate change, as it's we deal with that in the plan as an aggravating factor to a lot of the hazards that the plan addresses. You have some significant earthquake risk in the region, so that also ranked pretty high, and well as your high wind and drought events. We also launched a web page for the hazard mitigation plan, which could provide background information on the project throughout, and is where the current draft plan is up for review. And there's also a link that you can that goes to a short online comment form where we'll be collecting public comment as we go through the public review process. So if you're not familiar with the plan yet, I just want to provide an overview of how the plan is laid out and what the major components are. The first couple chapters are introductory and cover the sort of the baseline information for the community. Chapter 3 captures the planning effort and the process that was used to develop the plan. Chapter 4 is the largest portion of the plan in terms of both length and technical information. And Chapter 5 is what I tend to call the heart of the plan in terms of if you want to look at really and get an idea of what the plan is about, go to Chapter 5 and look at the mitigation strategy. And then Chapter 6 is just a short section to capture the plan adoption and where the final adoption resolution will be. And 7 is where the procedures for implementing and maintaining the plan are kept. So just a recap of the risk assessment, which is in chapter 4. This slide shows the list of hazards that are covered, all the natural hazards that are addressed in the plan. And the hazard assessment covers the location, what particular parts of the city are prone to hazards such as flood, the magnitude or strength of the hazard that could be anticipated, such as of the level of earthquake shaking that could be experienced, and the probability of these events. And we've overlaid that with the community assets, including the people, the buildings, the critical facilities and lifelines, and natural and environmental and cultural resources as well. As I mentioned, climate change is addressed as a subsection within each hazard profile as applicable. And we discussed there how that has the potential to intensify or exacerbate the severity of hazards. We do include 2 human-caused hazards, the public health and hazardous materials releases. And then ultimately what we've tried to do is come up with a comparative way to assign hazard significance from a planning perspective and based on the impact it could have on each hazard. And we should have a couple slides here that recap that. Again, this is the hazard profiles covers all of this information in depth. The planning requirements that are and guidance provided by FEMA wants you to look at these aspects of hazards and vulnerability in detail. So if you're particularly interested about a certain hazard, I would recommend that you go in and you review these aspects of this chapter. If you see things in here that maybe we might have missed a significant past occurrence, or you have additional information that you think could inform the plan, we would welcome that at this point to make this plan reflect the city as much as possible. And then this slide shows the list of all the hazards kind of comparatively ranked based on the extent of the hazard in the footprint of the planning area, the probability of occurrence, and then the overall summary magnitude or severity, which the combination of these 3 things leads to kind of our overall significance in terms of the plan and how we definitely want to make sure we have mitigation actions that cover the breadth of all the hazards, but and we definitely want to make sure we have the hazards covered that are ranked high or medium. And the high significant hazards include earthquake and public health hazards, but you also have some considerable flood risk, as well as risk to drought and severe weather events as well. So once we had completed the risk assessment, our next step was to develop the mitigation strategy. And this is goes from a broad goals and objectives down to specific actions. And this is also a process of looking at previous iterations of this plan, which had its origins with the Association of Bay Area Governments regional plan. We actually tracked the progress on mitigation actions that were identified over a decade ago. But this plan now focuses a lot more in detail on the city, and the city hazard mitigation planning team came up with these 4 goals as kind of the overarching what we want the plan to achieve. Minimizing development or new development in hazard prone areas, minimizing hazard impacts on existing development, building in resiliency in the community and building capacity against hazards. And then the 4th goal is about improving infrastructure and lifeline resiliency. And this is supported by specific mitigation actions. So we kind of stepped through the process of creating mitigation actions to achieve those goals, which over time can be monitored and measured as a measure of making progress. But this is a general way to categorize mitigation from preventative measures, which include your things like your floodplain regulations, your building standards, your stormwater management and capital improvement programs, to property protection, natural resource protection, emergency services, and public information and awareness. So the planning team was giving us a set of categories and tools as food for thought, and then based on the risk assessment, came up with about 30 specific actions that will, with the intent to benefit the entire planning area and cover all of the hazards. So you'll see a table in Chapter 5, which covers the actions kind of organized by hazard, and some of these are multi-hazard actions. The next slide here will summarize the number of actions that per hazard. So, not surprisingly, with earthquake being one of the top hazards, there's 5 of those. There's a number of multi-hazard mitigation actions, and there's several flood actions as well. And just to sort of whet your appetite for the details of what's in the plan, I have a few slides that summarize the gist of some of the mitigation actions here. So this slide shows the earthquake mitigation actions, which run the gamut from an inventory of soft story structures. So those are structures that historically have had poor performance during earthquakes. You've seen probably pictures of buildings that have collapsed on top where there's like a parking structure underneath. That's what's called like a soft story structure. There's also other non-ductile concrete or tilt-up buildings that could be more prone to damage. So getting a handle on the inventory of where these specific buildings are, and also being able to adopt
Hey, this is James.
incentives.
I'm one of them.
Hey, this is Laura. I'm one of the voices.
So ultimately, these actions capture the intent to look at seismic risk, and also provide incentives to encourage retrofitting of these buildings that might be vulnerable to earthquakes. This slide shows a high-level overview of the flood-related actions, which range from both temporary flood protection at the community cultural center to a more permanent mitigation alternative solution. Looking at repetitive loss areas, these are areas that have had more than one flood insurance claim and tend to highlight the most vulnerable areas for flooding to come up with a potential mitigation solutions. To the stormwater improvements and other improvements that are being looked at by the city. And then this isn't a complete list, but there's other mitigation actions around wildfire, from promoting wildfire resistant construction materials for new construction to looking at developing a tree ordinance that requires defensible space and promotes healthy landscapes, and developing a community wildfire protection plan to more specifically outline those fire mitigation actions. There was a project to upgrade and replace water line infrastructure that would build in resilience to drought, and another project around identification of cooling centers for extreme heat events, and having updated public outreach so that folks know where to take refuge during those events. And then there's a couple other projects that are related to emergency backup power for the public safety building, as well as continued PSPS readiness, community outreach, and preparedness. So that's again a quick overview of the mitigation actions in the plan. I do encourage folks to look at those and provide. There's a lot more detail on the implementation of those actions, and who which department would be taking the lead on that, and the time frame, as well as the potential funding that might be required to implement some of these. So on the topic of plan implementation and maintenance, those procedures are captured in Chapter 7. And it's really about how does this plan not just sit on a shelf, but is looked at and revisited on a regular basis. And one way to do that is to schedule an annual review. So reconvening the planning committee that brought this plan to life from the get-go on a regular basis, looking at monitoring grant and funding opportunities that might be coming down the pike. And then another way to sort of integrate the plan into the planning fabric of the city is to incorporate it with other planning mechanisms. In fact, this is a requirement of FEMA that we identify ways to tie this in with other plans. So the general plan safety element is a natural fit there, and by formally establishing a linkage between these two plans, the city could be eligible for a higher cost share from the state disaster assistance fund. But other projects, other planning elements are noted here, including our capital improvement plan. So the more we kind of integrate the mitigation into the day-to-day functions of the city, the more it's likely to be, kept alive. So, and certainly the intent is to track progress and publicize the successes of the plan implementation over time. All right, just wrap up the presentation here with some next steps. At this point in time, we are soliciting public input on the draft plan before it is finalized. We do have the link on the city's webpage where you can download the plan in a PDF form, and then there is a link for the short public comment form so we can collect that feedback. That feedback will go to the planning committee after it's been collected. And we will incorporate those that feedback as applicable into the final draft of the local hazard mitigation plan. At that point, the plan will go to California Office of Emergency Services. They do the review, which against the Disaster Mitigation Act requirements. And typically they will, they might come back with some questions or some clarification before it gets submitted to FEMA. They want to make sure by the time, it gets to FEMA that the plan is pretty much going to pass through FEMA's review without any issues. And both the state and FEMA have 45 days for their review. So that's why I was saying it, 90 days total after we submit this, which would probably be, late November at the earliest. So we're probably looking at, January or February before we get the final approval from FEMA. And we wait until to adopt the plan until we have that approvable pending adoption letter from FEMA. And at that point, the plan can be brought forth for the formal adoption. And then that will, the date of that adoption sets the 5-year clock. These are required to be updated every 5 years. And so that will really be the ongoing piece is to continue to have annual meetings to revisit the plan before that next 5-year update down the road. So that concludes the formal presentation here. At this point, happy to answer any questions or have some discussion.
Great, thank you. First, we'll start with planning commissioners. If any planning commissioners have questions, please let me know. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a question. I was looking for some specific information in the plan or in the study regarding flooding on Calder Creek, particularly through Ives Park. I see you have a mitigation for daylighting, et cetera, in that area, but I wonder if you can refer me to a section or a page that, or if you had discussions or information about flooding in Ives Park.
So I don't know exactly where it is in the report, but Kathy, I can answer that question. And in fact, it's obviously a good tie into the next presentation, which is part of that. So we are working with, Juliana, Dante, and I did actually discuss this recently, and I believe either we changed the language or we will be changing the language for that component to talk about Calder Creek. It's really along the entirety of it. Obviously, you all know about the large storm we got, and there was some localized flooding around the Calder Creek outfall, which is further east, not in Ives Park, but closer to Railroad Forest along the Joe Rodetta Trail. And Dante and I actually did a site walk with GHD working on the hydrology for both Ives Park, but also, making sure that the stormwater flows all along that creek watershed do address any flooding issues. So yeah, we did talk to Dante, and I did have some communications with Juliana about making sure that that mitigation wasn't specific to Ives Park, but also looked at. But that is why that mitigation is in the plan. It's both related to Ives Park and that whole Calder Creek corridor.
Okay, and I recognize that on the maps that show flooding, it has to do with the specific information we have on the flooding in Atascadero Creek and in the Laguna Channel. But other places like up on Pleasant Hill Road at Mitchell and Abbott and Ives Park, that those aren't marked on the map as flooding areas. So I just wanted to make sure that they were covered in the plan. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good question, Jeff. How do we, if people do have comments about, so Calder Creek is one of the two creeks, which are obviously stormwater drainage throughout the city. If they have knowledge of specific areas or locations outside of the mapped FEMA floodplains that are localized flooding areas that are problematic, what's the best way to get that information to you, Jeff?
I would welcome maybe use the comment form to state that, and then if you could get if you have specific information on those problem spots, if they could provide them to you, Carrie, and you could pass them on to us. But that's the exact kind of information we'd be looking for. If you feel that the discussion on those flood hazard areas, particularly the ones that are not mapped by FEMA, that's often where we're kind of lacking data. So we would welcome that information and can use that to make sure that the plan discusses those issues and the concerns with those areas. I also put in the chat the mitigation action on the Calder Creek daylighting, where that can be found.
Right, and so Kathy, we will, for that one, we will be, I think we will be expanding that to the entire Calder Creek channel area, just because it does make sense as obviously needing to maintain that as the stormwater channel. What was the other location you said around Pleasant Hill and?
It was listed in the report, Pleasant Hill Road and Mitchell Court. And another area that shows on the map where it floods is down at the bottom of Valley View. There are some apartment townhouses that often flood when there's flooding on Atascadero Creek.
Oh, yeah, that's a Atascadero Creek.
On the lower level and takes out their backyards some years.
Great, thank you.
Anything else, Kathy?
No, but just a few things I noticed, like the makeup of the city council, edits like that I'll put onto the comments link.
Great. Everett.
Thank you. A lot of information, obviously. One question on the mitigation goals, which is you had minimized new development in hazard-prone areas. Does that align with the regional housing needs allocation plan for the Bay Area? So as far as building and what's buildable?
So from that perspective, and I'm going to ask you for that page reference or what the mitigation reference was.
Let's see, page 5-2 of chapter 5, I guess.
Yeah, so the way thank you actually for going in there on that, Jeff. So the way the RENA number works, that's the regional housing allocation number. And so for us, it would be 200 and something units over an 8-year period, which is our target for housing. The RENA and ABAG don't tell you where it should go. That is up to the local, and so we're doing our housing element right now, as you all know from our recent kickoff meeting. Part of that effort will be to identify sites that are appropriate for development. I actually had a lot of discussions during the RENA process with ABAG, as did Jane Riley when she was working for the county, because it's same issue happens there. Regarding floodplain and the need to not be looking at intensifying a lot of development there. I don't know if you all know, but our original draft allocation in the RENA cycle was over 400 units. So some of that reduction is related to greenhouse gas, but some of it is also related to, hey, high density in a floodplain, high density housing in a floodplain isn't appropriate. It's it's often vulnerable people, let's not put them in a place that's full of houses, and that's an equity issue as well. So I do anticipate we'll have enough locations elsewhere in the city. Again, that number has dropped in recognition from ABAG that floodplains aren't reducing that development intensity in recognizing that.
Okay. My other question is regarding, obviously, with a lot of these disasters and actions, has to do with informing the public, education of the public, and just wanted to make sure, I know it's kind of in some of the areas, but the different forms of communication, whether it's internet, radio, different languages, whatever, that the emphasis is put in to try to reach people that receive communication, education in different formats. So I thought that might be something important to make sure that that's pointed out.
All right, thank you. Any other commissioners have a comments? I had a couple of questions. So just in terms of the process, so when the plan comes back from FEMA and they say it's ready to be adopted, does that come back to the Planning Commission, or does that just go straight to the City Council for adoption? Like, do we recommend to the City Council, or do they just get it directly?
Sure. So in this case, it's not something that needs a recommendation from the Planning Commission. So it can just go directly to the City Council. Obviously, there are significant changes. For some reason, we would bring it back and let you all know about what's going on. And I'll certainly provide updates on it and let folks know about the City Council meeting. But we don't anticipate, and Jeff, maybe you can talk a little bit about how Cal OES and FEMA both review this, or perhaps Chief Braga, who's been through this before, and what types of comments and changes they would request.
Yeah, there's a what's called a plan review tool that gets submitted with the plan, and that's part of our job as the consultant will be to fill out that plan review tool, and it basically says where in the plan and what page numbers the requirements are met. Typically if there's feedback, we try to make our plans as foolproof as possible, but sometimes depends on also who reviews the plan. They might take issue with some things, but what they want to make sure that there's if you've identified hazards that have significant risks, that you have mitigation actions that address those risks, and then also making sure that you've documented the process adequately. They like to see the backup meeting materials and minutes and that kind of thing. But a single jurisdictional plan such as this typically goes through the approval process a bit quicker and smoother than a large multi-jurisdictional plan in my experience.
Great. And then I'm just curious, and again, in terms of process, how does this get incorporated into the general plan? What would be the methodology for that?
So we don't need to do a general plan amendment. I believe our general plan, so we have a safety element in the general plan, and it talks about having a local hazard mitigation plan. And so this would be it would be adopted as a document, and that new document would replace the older document. So this is an update. This isn't the first time we've done it. Our current plan is expired in terms of what FEMA requires. But it's still our local, it's still our hazard mitigation plan until we adopt a new one. So this would simply replace that.
Got it. And then I did have a couple of specific questions in the plan. So on page 2-18, which is page 38 of the staff report, this is just kind of background data. It talks about commuter population. And it says Sebastopol has, X number of jobs and X number of residents, workers, and then it assumes that looks like the difference are commuting out of Sebastopol, which I think we have probably a lot more people commuting out of Sebastopol. Not everyone that is of working age that lives in Sebastopol is necessarily working in Sebastopol, and the excess are the ones that are commuting. So I don't know if that's really necessarily important. Obviously, there's a lot more traffic that goes back and forth, and more than 2,800 people, I think, because of people working in other places. But I don't know if that's something that is known that we could be quantified, or if that should be adjusted somehow.
We can certainly take another look at that, and if you have information to inform that section, we would certainly welcome that.
Yeah, I certainly don't. I don't know if Carrie, if the city has any kind of other kind of background data on people commuting to other places, how many people do that. But
Yeah, we did the 2020 census is starting to release some information. So we can look through and see if there is updated information in the 2020 census that would be helpful for that. Obviously, that most of that took place before COVID, so it hopefully would be more or less relevant, or people would be still reporting their normal activities as opposed to their COVID if they're working from home, anew or temporarily. So I can look at that. And SCATA did do a travel model recently. I don't think it didn't look at numbers in this way. It was more about trips and how many were through trips versus and destinations. But I can kind of look at that and see if it jives with some of this information, or if there's maybe something else there.
Okay, thanks. And then on page 4-88, which is 164 of the staff report, there's a couple of maps about, critical infrastructure being in wildfire areas. And there's these two green boxes that indicate shelter, which I'm assuming is some kind of, community shelter. I don't know exactly what that means, but one of them looks like it's the bathrooms at Regal Park, and the other one looks like it might be Carrie's house. It's like at the end of Eddie Ellis there, like kind of on the north edge of town. And I'm just wondering, what are those, and what kind of shelter are we concerned about being in this wildfire area? Does anyone know where those came from? I don't know.
That's a good question. We can definitely check at that. The square on the north side, which is fairly close to my house, it may be the Jehovah's Witness site. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure. I don't know that they have been a there's a church on High School Road,
Yeah,
if that's what that's trying to map. But that's a good point. We can definitely check into that. So it was that one, and what was the other one?
the other one is like in Regal, it looks
Yeah,
like.
so we did map Regal because during COVID, they did use Regal Ranch. They did use the park, the regional park, as a shelter location
Okay,
when people were evacuating from West County, like the Armstrong Wood areas for fires. They wanted an outdoor space where they could coordinate and direct people, and they did actually use Regal.
okay,
So that is, it seems weird, but that is why that's on that one's
Okay.
on there.
okay. And then I just had a question about the soft story. There was and that had been in, I guess, the 2010 plan as well, this issue of soft story inventory. And I'm just wondering, is it possible? I mean, do we ever, make a requirement that those need to be addressed if like a building is remodeled, for example? Or I'm just wondering, how do we hold people to trying to improve that situation? Is there a methodology for doing that? Or if you come to pull a building permit for some reason over a certain, amount of money or a certain area of remodel, like we do for fire sprinklers, is there a way to require that to be addressed?
So I'm going to ask Jeff to address. And so first of all, Paul, I did realize that green dot, I think it's just on the other side of the road. It's supposed to be at the high school. Because as
Okay.
you know, the high school was an evacuation
Yeah.
center for a month or so during the Tubbs fire. So we'll make sure we move that. I don't really want y'all to come in my house.
Yeah. That's
And
my
Jeff, can
figure,
you
but-
address the question about how people deal with soft stories? Do they require it through their building code, or how do people usually implement that?
That can be addressed similar to like your floodplain ordinance, where if there's a substantial improvement in the floodplain, which is defined as over 50% of the value of the structure, you could have a requirement that there'd be seismic retrofitting as part of that. That's just one example, or just like with the flood ordinance, you could have a substantial damage type of clause where if it's more than 50% damage from, whether it's a structure fire or some other hazard event, that it have a requirement to address the soft story vulnerabilities. So there's different ways you could approach that, and there's some other hazard models out there that you can follow.
Okay. And then my last question, and this is maybe one for the fire chief, but I'm just curious. This is so it's on page 251 of the staff report, which is page 5-26. This has to do with defensible space mitigation. I'm just wondering how that works in kind of an urban area like Sebastopol, when your house could be 5 feet from your property line. How do you address kind of defensible space requirements or issues when you only have so much control over the environment immediately adjacent to your property?
No, that's a good point. I do try to follow the CAL FIRE's defensible space program that they have. But, I am up against the areas that we live in. So what I provide, well, the city has a weed abatement ordinance. So that kind of takes care of a piece of the pie. And then what I provide as the fire chief and fire marshal is I will go out and meet with the homeowners and walk their property and walk their home and come up with a plan of recommendations, maybe trimming back some oak trees, cutting back some brush or bushes that are along their home. And so it's more of kind of a one-on-one that I'm doing right now with the homeowners that request it.
Mhm.
I think it is much easier for the rural areas and for like CAL FIRE to have a nice plan, and they put out really a nice little publication, and this is what you should do. Well, we don't have we don't have that luxury. So for me, it's more of a personal touch and providing a walkthrough assessment. So that's what I've been doing.
Great, thanks. It's good to know because I have a neighbor whose tree is overreaching my property. I'd love to, maybe I'll have you out and have you give some advice on that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and Paul, just to expand on that a little bit, one of the things that is in the hazards as well, and it's I think is assigned to both the planning department and the fire department, is looking at the tree ordinance and are there adjustments that need to be made. There's a few innovative, so we already don't want, but we haven't banned exotic species like acacias, pyrophytic species like acacias and eucalyptus. We do exempt them from tree permits because we know those are issues. But is there any funding or program available for, and Bill and I got this question 2-3 weeks ago, someone who was interested in removing the eucalyptus tree. Obviously they're fire hazards, everyone knows that, but they can be hugely expensive to remove just because of the size. Is there any funding, is there a program in place for assisting people to do that as part of urban forestry and vegetation management? And then do our tree ordinances reflect that? I know I've discussed in other places, I don't know if they implemented it, but instead of replacing tree, so we have a tree replacement requirement of, if you remove a tree, you generally have to plant 2 new ones, a heritage tree, I should say, that's for a single family that's 10 inches diameter or larger at breast height. For multifamily and commercial, it's 10 inches. Requires review by the city and usually replacement, other than those exotic species. One of the things that communities can do is they can, you could change that to say either plant 2 or take out a pyrophytic tree on your lot as well. And then, it's not really reforesting, but it is trying to help to remove some of those hazards. Or I do know communities who have banned certain trees and you cannot plant them. So you can't plant thusias and acacias and things that are absolutely pyrophytic and invasive. And so there's definitely policies we can look at as we move forward with implementation of this.
Yeah, just in particular, I think about, removing, if you remove a heritage tree from a property, then you're required to plant 2 more. But even if you have a small lot to start with and you're getting rid of a tree because of whatever reason it's too big and it's shading or a danger or whatever, and then you have to plant 2 more, maybe that's not the right approach if you have a property that's going to be negatively impacted in another 20 years when these trees grow up.
Right, and we do have a tree fund, so that if that just doesn't make sense on your lot, which it doesn't on some lots, then the city uses that for maintenance or replacement of trees. And we've done a lot of work in our parks recently. I know Ives Park, there've been some trees removed that were hazards and replanted, and that kind of forestry management.
And Paul, maybe one more note. Right now, I really have no authority as fire chief, as fire marshal, to go to someone's property. I mean, I get complaints all the time about dead trees, and it's really frustrating for me. We have a really good weed abatement ordinance, but it doesn't cover trees. And I have no authority to go to a homeowner or a property owner and tell them, hey, that pine tree in your backyard, that thing is so dead and so volatile. So I'm really hoping that what we develop with some type of a tree ordinance will give me the authority to say, no, sorry, that tree's got to go. And right now, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I have no authority.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I see, Deborah, you have a questions or comments? You're muted.
I remember you say mute yourself if you're not speaking. Actually, Carrie answered one of my questions, which was, I know it's a struggle for a lot of homeowners when they would like to do some of this fire maintenance, but cost is an issue. So it sounds like something you're already looking at and addressing. So the second piece of that would be on these mitigation recommendations in this, where is the budget coming from in order for the city to be able to implement some of these solutions? And is that a piece of this, has that already, happened, or is that phase 2, or where is the, yeah.
So I'll start this, and then I know Jeff may know a little bit more about FEMA grants, or perhaps Bill, but so that one of the reasons to do this, I'll say it, and if I say it wrong, please, Jeff, correct me. There's sort of 2 reasons in my mind for making sure your local hazard mitigation plan is up to date. One is that in the event of emergency, you make sure that we are eligible for FEMA funds for recovery. The other is that once you have an adopted plan, you're eligible to apply to FEMA for grants to implement those mitigation measures. And so that is a source of funding. And Jeff, I'm just going to check in. Did I say that right?
Yeah, the plan makes you eligible for the FEMA hazard mitigation assistance, of which there's a variety of grants that are both there's some that are tied to disaster declarations anywhere in the state, opens up a pot of funding. And then there's the new BRIC grant, which is an annual grant cycle, and having this plan approved will make you eligible for that. And your question on what is the funding source? So each of the actions has a section on potential funding where we've identified whether it might be general fund or state funds or potentially FEMA grants.
So,
but you're right, and part of the next phase in implementation is securing that funding and refining the cost estimates to implement these.
So if I heard you right, Carrie, at the beginning, you said the current plan that we have is outdated and was supposed to have been updated. And then also what I additionally just heard was that having an updated plan means that we can be eligible for FEMA funding in the event of, one of these, emergencies happen. So does that mean between the time this gets approved, which you said would be maybe January, February-ish, and now if there were to be anything that happened, we would not be eligible for FEMA funding?
I'm going to ask Chief or Jeff to answer that one, because I know with Chief Frog is our emergency operations head for the city, and he has certainly had a share of dealing with FEMA funding in the past couple of years. But if one of you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
So
go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, effectively, your statement is correct. You would not be eligible. However, if there was a disaster, that affected the area, you'd still be eligible for the recovery funds, and by the hazard mitigation funding usually follows 6 to 8 months after the federal disaster declaration. So there's usually a window of time there. And then if they know your plan is near complete, sometimes they'll allow extenuating circumstances to apply.
Right. And thanks, Jeff. And you know, it has been frustrating for us. You know, Carrie and I, we see a lot of grant opportunities coming across our desk. And that's why we truly appreciate Jeff and Juliana in putting together our plan and getting it blessed by OES and FEMA. When these grant opportunities come across after we have implemented our plan, we will now be able to apply for a grant, you know, for funding. Let's say defensible space that Paul and I were talking about. There's grants out there for defensible space. And unfortunately, because our plan has not been updated and approved and adopted, I'm not able to apply for those grants. So I'm truly looking forward to this, you know, early next year when this is all you know, blessed and adopted, and I can go after some money to help me with some of the plans that I want to work on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. And Zach.
Yes, thank you, Paul. This is actually a really good segue to the discussion about funding. I think one of the other areas that I think, and I guess my question is this follow-up work by the city? But we have in these mitigation measures, of course, there are many that are categorized as high priority, and obviously many with significant price tags. Is the prioritization generally done agency by agency, or would that be something that would City Council planning might take a sort of overview look at some point? So how is prioritization dealt with? That is to say, fine tuning of the high priority items, given that it's multiple different agencies carry responsibility.
In terms of the actions that have been identified in the plan, there was a prioritization process that was used to give an initial priority for the action, and that was based on some criteria that include, you know, does it address areas of most risk, as well as, you know, does it have we looked at the social, technical, environmental, legal, administrative, and political aspects of each project to kind of come up with a collective kind of a low, medium, high prioritization. Now, ultimately, when you get down to looking at in more detail the funding availability, the price tag, and you know, so those priorities aren't necessarily set in stone. You might want to tackle. There could be some lower priority, but you know, lower hanging fruit, easier to implement projects that you might want to go for first. So they are prioritized, but again, there's still it's really kind of how the city wants to move forward with these.
Okay, yeah. So it's and absolutely, I saw the prioritization and understand that. But of course, there's so many high priority items is really where the question is. So, but I think what I really hear you saying is how that out of those high priority items, it's going to be the agencies and discussion cross agency discussion, perhaps in terms of agreeing a strategy or a way of going after, as you say, the high priority, low hanging fruit, or specific mitigation methods that are deemed to be the most high priority, so to speak.
Yeah, and one of the things, Zach, just to add to that is, you know, I actually work pretty closely with Chief Braga and with Dante at Public Works. And so, you know, as department heads, we have weekly meetings and actually we have weekly department head meetings, but we also have it every other week where we're just meeting those of us who are sort of in charge of some of the physical infrastructure for the city. we're reviewing, private projects, for instance, that come to the commission for review to make sure we're all on the same page. But we also look at other things like this or city infrastructure needs. And so, I think for me, yes, there are a number of things that are higher priorities. That always makes it easier when you're applying for a grant, but it also provides flexibility given how quickly things are changing. 2017, we had major fires. 2019, we had a major flood. 2020, we had a major pandemic. 2021, we had a major drought. So it's like where, and I don't want us to be chasing our tails all the time, but so there is a need to look at all of these things as a comprehensive approach. Which thing goes first? I have confidence that as a city, the various departments will be able to work cooperatively together in terms of understanding, well, what makes the most sense right now. And so if there's, one application or whatnot that we're providing for, and of course we do take any grants that we're applying for that require any sort of match from the city, go to city council for authorization for that funding. So the council is involved with that decision. They don't mind if you go after 100% grants, of course, that we can go after, and we certainly do look at those on a case-by-case basis as well.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Kerry. That's kind of what I was looking for, that sort of interaction amongst all the agencies that are, would ultimately be responsible for different implementation of different measures. So thanks so much.
Right, and we do have the advantage that we're such a small city that, it's if you have one or two departments, you're constantly talking to the same people all the time, and you're always kind of on the same page, or at least understand where things are going.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Any other comments from any commissioners before we open to the public? All right, then I will open this up to members of the public. If anyone from the public would like to make a comment on the local hazard mitigation plan, this is your chance. You will have 3 minutes, and please let us know either by raising your virtual hand down at the bottom of your screen or waving in your video, and we will call on you to make your comment.
Chair Fritz, I do not see any.
I do not either. It's okay, we will close public comment, and unless any other commissioners has anything final to say, I think we will be able to move on. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks, Jeff, for being here and doing this plan. And thanks, Zach, for your help as the Planning Commission liaison.
You're welcome. My pleasure. It's been a great experience working with the city.
All right. So next, we will move on to item 6B, which is the Calder Creek Naturalization Project. Sounds like we're getting a presentation tonight.
Yes, thank you, Chair Fritz. Commissioners, tonight we do have with us Jessica Hall, and who is the fellow working on our project, as well as Ann Riley from Waterways Restoration Institute. So this is the second of 4 sessions with the Planning Commission to take us through the community visioning and concepts designed for Calder Creek naturalization. And I do want to note, we do actually have, I do see someone from GHD who's helping us with the hydrology, Jeremy Silva. He wasn't required to be at this meeting, but so thank you, Jeremy, very much for coming to listen in. We will be having a team meeting tomorrow after this to take forward the input from the commission and members of the public tonight. But I'll let Jessica and Riley describe a little bit more of your project, of where we are at in the project, and take us through the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to see how the screen share works out. Hopefully this does what it's supposed to do. I think this is the correct screen. Are you able to see a PowerPoint of the show?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's actually sharing the wrong screen.
Oh.
So let me try that again. It's not, it's,
So Jessica, that was sharing just the slide, just. so
Oh,
you
it
know.
was.
wasn't-
Okay, 'cause
yeah,
on-
yeah, so
on
whatever
my
you did
end,
was
it-
great.
so now I've just shared the wrong thing. One more time.
Yeah.
It's so great that this is being recorded so that this can be viewed in posterity.
Yeah, it was right the first time.
Okay, got it. All right, so hopefully this time you're seeing the cover sheet. I know, you know, with COVID-19, everyone's learning about people's pets. I do have a cat who is meowing in the background, and I apologize. She wants my attention. So I also have Anne Riley here, and Anne Riley, I hope you have unmuted yourself so that you can jump in, and we're gonna get going. So just to start, let's see if I can advance slides competently here. Okay, there we go. So just to start, this is a follow-on to our first presentation, which showed examples of what can be done on urban streams. And tonight we're moving forward with some initial landscape site observations at Ives Park, and with reviewing the underlying principles guiding our restoration approach to the creek. This includes some cautionary tales of lessons learned with engineered structures on in concert with streams and restoration approaches, and also concluding with a conversation looking at what our guiding principles are, as well as wanting to open up conversation with the Planning Commission and members of the public with how we should be thinking about the creek in relationship to the Ives Park Master Plan. What is it that, you know, in the master plan you think can accommodate the creek, and, you know, what are things that are just, you know, you want us to really protect and not encroach upon within the master plan. So that's a kind of our overview. And moving forward, you know, we wanted to articulate some project goals just for clarity's sake. So our primary goal, the one that we came to the city with, was really about restoring geomorphic processes to Calder Creek, another way of saying naturalization, and building on the master plan vision. But as we went into conversations more and more, we also recognized that there was a need to look at the watershed-wide kind of vision for Calder Creek. And we are working with some property owners on Jewel Avenue, one-on-one on looking at what can be done on their properties. And we also recognize that downstream, there's some room for vision planning with what to do to help alleviate flood issues, as well as really move creek connectivity all the way to Railroad Park, Railroad Forest. And just, you know, on the note of that, something that has already come up in tonight's conversation and tonight's meeting is the fact that we do have flooding down at the lower end of the storm drain outfall for the creek, and that you've experienced that as recently as Sunday. And so, you know, it's very pertinent to the city for us to be looking at Calder Creek and to be thinking about that larger connectivity issue. You know, I did mention the word geomorphic processes. That might be a little bit unfamiliar term. So just broadly speaking, and in very general terms, streams are formed by how they move water and sediment and how they dissipate energy. If you think about stream channels, you know, they move rocks and boulders. There's a lot of energy in stream channels. And the channel form, its shape, as well as dimensions, as well as how much meander it has and its slope, all are responses to those core processes. And so when we do restoration, we want to be able to create as much room as possible for the stream to be able to continue to perform those processes and actually provide the services that those processes provide to us. So that's what we mean broadly. And as we continue in our process of developing restoration alternatives, we'll be providing a little more clarity and examples of what that means. Just really, we've been talking with community members as well as meeting and reviewing site conditions at Ives Park, and just want to do a quick walking tour of some of the things that we see on a landscape scale that have a role to play in how we might be thinking about naturalizing the creek at the park. So just starting off at Jewel Avenue, you might notice that north in this diagram is kind of off to the upper right corner. That what you see is, I think everyone knows, and this is probably came up in your master planning process, that you have traffic coming around Jewel and to Willow, that there's not a whole lot of an entry statement, and there's actually fencing. So you may not be fully thinking about entering the park at this location, and that you don't really see the creek. It's kind of hidden from view. As you go further into the park, you see the channelized creek. There's redwood trees right up against the edges of the channel walls. And so there's definitely, a challenge here for thinking about, well, how do we naturalize this, or how do we, work with this channel when there's a risk of destabilizing the root systems of these trees. And so those are things we're going to be exploring and talking to arborists about and trying to figure out the best way to address this. You also see utility lines crossing the stream. And that's, always a very sensitive issue and an expensive one to try and relocate. So we want to work with what's there to the greatest extent possible. And just, as a landscape issue, lots of barriers and things that say stay out, like these fences. And there's an existing area that is a very popular and shaded area for gathering and enjoying music. The master plan, I believe, relocates this, but we are aware of this, and you want to be sensitive to what's currently within the park as well as what's planned in the master plan. So we'll be coming back to this, I think, in our conversation later this evening. As you move further into the park, we get to that area where the creek, this is upstream up here, and the creek is opening up, and this, historically had flashboards, and this would be a temporary pond for swimming. It's a real opportunity to create a floodplain that the stream is connected to. And we also see that there are edge conditions here that are pretty firm, both in terms of the master plan and just in terms of the nature of the infrastructure. As you go further, you've got this playground to the right. And again, in the master plan, this is proposed to be relocated. It currently floods. And again, we have lots of visual barriers surrounding the views. And then coming closer to High Street, the creek comes up against the edge of the property line. And, so you have this sort of narrow area with some vegetation. You have people's properties just yards away from the creek. And again, the fencing that we see. We also, just like with the redwoods, we have some oak trees very close to the channel. And so how to regrade and naturalize the stream while protecting the root systems of those trees would be, again, one of the challenges that we'll be looking at as we move forward. And where the creek comes into the culvert, we're all familiar now. We've all been talking about this backwatering issue, and how there's probably also sediment piling up in here as a part of that. And so this is what we would call a hydraulic constraint. So I'm going to turn this over to Riley. We've got a little Halloween-y with you here, and want to convey some cautionary tales about things to think about. When we think about design solutions for Calder Creek, there's just some lessons learned and, information to know about, so that when you're thinking about, well, what about doing this? Here's a little bit of background for if we say, well, we're trying to really achieve other things with naturalization. This will help you understand. So Riley, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. We wanted to have a seasonally appropriate discussion about things we don't want to do on Calder Creek. The horror show involves common mistakes that have been made over the years with bank stabilization systems, or straightening creeks out, or putting in undersized culverts, or even railroad trestles. Next slide. So the common response to creeks eroding excessively has been, or even depositing too much sediment, has been, oh, well, let's just line these creeks. Let's put them in gabions or concrete or riprap. As a matter of fact, there have been so many failures of gabions, which are wire baskets full of rock, that the water boards, the 9 regional water boards around the state, are no longer permitting this kind of treatment. So the next couple slides, keep going, Jessica, show some examples of how these kinds of systems failed. The next slide, the attraction of these was, oh, well, we can hold the banks, but because there's baskets with rocks, these can support plants. But in fact, planting gabions is really hard. So next slide. The failure mechanism for some of these is that because you harden the banks, the creeks will concentrate their energy on the bottoms and erode the bottoms of the creeks and basically undercut the pinnings for things like rock or concrete or gabions or riprap. And this is an Army Corps concrete lining along a stream in San Diego. And the pore pressure has built up behind the concrete and cracked it, plus the basic incision going on in that system has undercut the toes. Next slide. This is this is a Bay Area slide of, again, this is an Army Corps county sponsored flood control project. The idea has been to smooth the banks, make the water go really fast. By making the water go really fast, you move a larger volume through at a lower level. And so our Nature Bats Last horror show includes a large number of these kinds of photos where concrete linings have failed. Next slide. There's another example. Next slide. Los Angeles River. Again, a formally designed U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project with the river carving what we call low flow active channel right through the invert. Next slide. So these slides are to point out that we have been thinking in terms of concrete being the answer to stabilized stream systems or river systems. And over the last 50 years, we realized with this feedback of actually looking at the performance over time, that this is really not the solution. And this is another example of an Army Corps designed flood control project where the concrete has actually been thrown up, tossed downstream, and this is emergency rock around the concrete as an interim strategy to try to deal with the failures. Next slide. My first job in California was with the California Department of Water Resources. I was part of an effort to riprap or rock the Sacramento River because it kept meandering into walnut orchards and other kinds of orchards that were very valuable. A graduate student at the University of California, Davis, floated down the river to understand what the value was of these projects that we were using taxpayers' money for, and recorded numerous islands of rock in the Sacramento River where the river just meandered right around our riprap and left piles of riprap in the river. Kind of a wise ass graduate student thing to do, but what we began to realize is that we needed to have a different approach for bank stabilization and river meandering. And this shows one of our photos that we had of our project where the bank was just blown out immediately upstream or downstream of our riprap, as well as these riprap islands we were creating. Next slide. And this happens on a small scale. This is a part in a moderate to small size city in the Bay Area where they put rock on the sides of the bank to try to stop the bank erosion, and the actual ongoing incision of this creek just undercut all this rock and it collapsed. Next slide. And the other thing, this is a shot from Marin County. Sac Creek, which we have quite a bit of along Calder Creek, starts to fail. The water builds up behind it. The pore pressure starts to crack the Sac Creek. If you one of the early slides on the slideshow showed where that was happening over by the redwoods, or even downstream where that culvert starts to go underground past Ives Park. And this is an example of where Sac Creek just blew out the bank, actually both upstream and downstream and across on the opposite bank. So these hard points will create these vortex whirls of the water that tends to erode very near where these hard points are. Next slide. What happened in the 90s is these entrepreneurs went, oh, you know, we have to do something more environmental than concrete, and people want plants. So let's make these concrete engineering structures that have holes in them, and have them along flood control channels to make the water go a little faster, but to provide some plant growth and also to provide some plant stability. This is one of a whole library of slides I have. Next slide. From a tour that I did throughout Harris County in Texas, where these articulated concrete blocks just failed on a massive level. And unfortunately, these articulated concrete block salesmen stopped at many cities in the Bay Area and convinced many public works departments to try these out. And again, we've been learning from the last decades on, no, this is not the system to use. Next slide. This is just another example of these failing in the Bay Area. Next slide. Another failure. So there's different brands and designs for these things, and they do not have good enough horizontal controls on them failing. They tend to be undercut in terms of movements in the creek's meandering or eroding. So again, this is part of our horror show we don't want to see happen at Calder Creek. Next slide. One of the planning commissioners asked in our first meeting, can we just raise the bottom of Calder Creek so it's not down 10 feet or 12 feet or 15 feet? And there used to be attempts to raise the bottoms of creeks. This is that was written up in a number of Natural Resources Conservation Service or Soil Conservation Service manuals as a strategy. And this is an example of where weirs were put across this stream. This is actually down near San Diego to catch sediment. And the whole concept here is you put weirs in, the weirs catch sediment, the sediment fills up behind the weirs or check dams, and then starts to raise the bottom of the creek. What typically happens when we try to use this strategy is if you just think about what you know about creeks, if they're on higher elevations, up in the hills, in mountains, they dissipate their energy in the steps or pools, kind of like staircases, little waterfalls. But as streams enter flatter slopes, they dissipate their energy by meandering. And so if you flatten the slope more than it's already flattened using these kinds of channel filling approaches, it induces meandering, unintentional meandering. So this shows this stream just meandering right around this grade controller weir. Next slide. Another example is, this is in a park in down towards San Jose. The creek used to meander to the left. The park managers decided to fill that. So where that concrete, yeah, right there was laid to help put the fill in into the park to increase their recreational use. Also, just upstream of that tree or that arrow on the right, a weir was put in because after all, what happened is we shortened the creek and that steepened the creek. So these weirs are put in to.
You can just get plain. I don't want pepperoni.
Change.
Okay.
And so what this picture shows is the stream just going back to its old meander.
No, I don't want pepperoni.
Engineering work all out. Next slide. Another example of the creek being shortened, a meander being taken out, a weir being put in. This is and that was to accommodate new land use changes, just to the right of this photo. Next slide. Next slide. This is what happened just directly downstream. If you, Jessica, you need to go back one slide. So it eroded out this bank. Why? Why did this happen? These little weirs or little check dams collect sediment behind them. Then the streams have a certain innate capacity to carry a certain amount of sediment. If they drop the sediment behind these weirs, they pick up the amount of sediment they dropped as they go downstream. So again, this is a very common occurrence.
If I may interrupt, I would like to challenge Zach.
Are we okay?
We're okay. I've muted the person who
Right.
was
We get questions?
unintentionally speaking.
I'd be glad to entertain questions at the end. Next slide. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Now we're getting into strategies that have not succeeded for planting creeks. This is a type of block that was put along an urban stream in the East Bay that collapsed during high flows. And so this is probably not a strategy we want to use on Calder. Next slide. Next slide. Sometimes these geocells, if you go back to the one slide back, have been used with the idea that it could provide some green growing stuff along creeks, but they typically get overrun by weeds. Next slide. Next slide, Jessica. This is, whoops. Go back one. We're also not interested in a creek where we do rock gardening, which means that we use these huge boulders, plants, drought tolerant plants, over on the left is some ferns. This was a project that occurred in the Bay Area. The ferns died in the first year because there's no shade. The site is too wet to really support drought tolerant kinds of plants that are pretty and flower a lot of herbaceous plants. So this stuff died. And the regulatory agencies required that this particular city plant willows, alders, and other plants that could function to shade the creek. The rushes and reeds started to move in, aquatic weeds. There were algae blooms. So we don't want to do rock gardening. Okay, next slide. And now we're into the hydraulic constrictions horror show. This is when we don't have railroads to worry about on Calder Creek, but railroads, bridges. How about another slide? The water backs up. We know the water is backing up behind a hydraulic constriction, as the culverts enter the laguna. And so one of the most important things you can do is open up space in those hydraulic constrictions and remove things like culverts that are too small or put in at the wrong slope. So we'll look at concepts for trying to address the kinds of issues we have in the downstream portions. Next slide. A bridge that's too low, creating flooding. This is actually the Napa River. Next slide. One mistake we make is not shading the stream channels. So having a canopy growth over the channel is important, because if you don't, then you get this kind of rushes and reeds growing in the channel. And then these kinds of aquatic plants catch sediment. The channel starts to fill in and you start to choke the channel, and then you get into a flooding situation. So a number of Bay Area counties are creating stream management manuals. Sonoma is one of them, Napa is another, and Marin's another, where even for channels that were originally designed to be just flood control channels, they now understand that to deal with their maintenance issues, they need to have trees growing on the margins of the channels to shade them so that we don't run into this kind of situation. Next slide. Next slide. Of course, straightening a creek often creates slope instabilities as well as erosion on the banks, so that the creek will do what's called head cutting. Or if you go back to that last slide, it'll show that there's like a little waterfall in that channel, kind of in the middle of the photo. And that's because the creek is too short, because of the meanders have been taken out. You also see how that creek is trying to re-meander. And this next slide shows the banks collapsing because the creek is too steep, it's too short, it's too narrow. Next slide. Next slide. Example of a creek that's too wide. That stream or river was widened to hold more flood flows. You may want to go back one slide, Jessica. And because it was widened, that red line shows what that stream used to be in terms of width. And in a flood control project, it was widened. And by widening that channel during the low and moderate flows, the flows are more shallow, and the lack of depth hurts the stream power, reduces the stream power, and then the stream drops out the sediment. So then the local agencies have to deal with digging out the sediment to keep the channel capacity. This was a widely committed mistake throughout the Bay Area and California. And now we understand that we've got to design the correct width and the correct depth, as well as the length of these urban creeks, so that we don't have these problems. Next slide. This is a bridge that's been undercut so that it's going to fail. That arrow shows where the bottom of the creek used to be. Another reason not to have streams that are too short. Next slide. This was a very well-intended project in the Santa Rosa area. It was intended to help fish habitat, steelhead migration through a flood control channel. A landscape architect drew a new channel for restoring the creek. This person did not have the science behind what the meander should be, how wide it should be, how deep it should be. And you'll see that the trees that were planted along this channel are very far from the channel. So the channel eroded around boulders. It eroded around the woody debris that was supposed to provide the habitat. And the water was so hot by not placing the vegetation next to the channel that the steelhead population died off. So the California Department of Fish and Wildlife required this project, and this local entity had to go back and address all these various mistakes. Okay, next slide. The talk I'm giving now was basically summarized by an Army Corps of Engineers publication in 1990. Because local governments went back to the Army Corps and said, you've helped partner with a number of these projects. Where have we gone wrong? So they went out to their 36 districts in the United States, sent out their engineers, and realized after doing a post-project monitoring that these strategies were ending up with bank stabilization, slope instabilities, and so forth, just as I've just described in this slideshow. Next slide. And so what Jessica and I are going to be doing when we look at Calder Creek is looking at all the various variables that end up affecting streams and collecting the data on them. There's about 16 variables. So we're going to be looking at making sure that the kind of sediment transport in the system is that the sediment going in upstream is more or less the sediment going downstream, and that we end up with a stable stream system. Next slide. The red line in this represents conceptually Calder Creek. What we're going to be doing is trying to create a channel width and depth and a floodplain and vegetation along the creek that avoids the kind of problems that I just talked about. Jessica, do you, I think the next slide is I will continue the horror show that goes from what we didn't want to have happen on the left of the slide, which was a conventional channelization project, to what we did on the right side of the slide, which was to design a correct width and depth for the channel, a riparian area, and a floodplain. And The slide on the left was supposed to provide protection from the 1 in 100-year flood. The slide on the right actually does provide protection from the 1 in 100-year flood, but it's based on these different concepts for design. Next slide. Failing creek, failing riprap, failing concrete lining. What did we do instead to stabilize the banks in this area? By the way, there's houses right up to these fences. Next slide. The concrete was taken out. Even in a very constrained space, a better width and depth was put in. Some erosion control fabric was put down. Probably something we would like to use on Calder Creek. Next slide. And the kinds of soil bioengineering systems that the Army Corps has now published in their documents on the Natural Resources Conservation Service, starting in about 2000 and 2007. The federal government manuals are very different now for handling these kinds of erosion issues. And you'll see that immediately after we put the new soil bioengineering in and plantings, that we were hit with a 1 in 25-year flood. And there's this channel performing under flood conditions. Next slide. A failing creek in Marin County, building right up against it. This is failing gabions, by the way, falling apart. Next slide. Brush matting and posts, soil bioengineering strategy was put in here. Next slide. There it is growing up over a period of about 2 or 3 years. Next slide. This is what it looks like in this reach now. Next slide. And we showed some examples that we liked of very urban creeks with buildings right up against them. And that's why I put this one in again of San Luis Obispo, which really inspires us for how Calder Creek could look, even though it's in a very urban setting. Next slide. This was what was being proposed for a stream and a redevelopment area to allow building right up to the edge of the creek. Next slide. The Waterways Restoration Institute determined what the meander belt was needed in order to have a stable stream, to allow it to meander, to allow it to erode some, to allow it to deposit some, to allow natural vegetation to grow along it, and also to contain the 100-year flood. And by setting back the development envelope by about 15 feet. Next slide. We were able to get that corridor basically sandwiched between the new development envelope and an existing post office and have the creek look like this. Next slide. Next slide. You want to take over, Jessica?
Yeah, thank you. So what we've shown are some of the opportunities that we have for restoring streams using geomorphic processes as a driver of design. And in addition to that, we have to look at vegetation as part of the stream system. And Riley gave those examples where improper planting actually contributed to problems on the stream channel. And so we want to make sure that as we're going forward with the design for the stream, that we're also placing vegetation correctly and that we're using the correct species. So I'm sure that a lot of you are very familiar with a lot of the native trees and shrubs of the region, but I've included a list here of some of the trees. I've broken them up by what part of the stream corridor they would be more common in. When you're in the floodplain where you're getting more frequent flooding, there are certain species that are just better adapted to handle that. And those include willows, alders, box elders, and cottonwoods. Not to say that you won't see other species as well, but those are the dominant ones that also play a role in helping to secure the banks. And then as you go a little bit higher in elevation away from the floodplain, as you're going up the slopes or as you're at terraces midway between the creek corridor and the adjacent uplands, you have more variety of trees that you might see, including redwoods, including buckeye and bay laurel. In some areas, you know, Riley and I were talking about, we've even seen oaks in those areas, which is not something you normally think of in a stream corridor, but they are showing up in Sonoma County that way. And then there's a variety of shrubs. I'm not going to name them all, but the list is here. And those also play a role in protecting the banks, both by securing them with their root systems and also through their leaf matter to helping to mute the effect of runoff coming from the side slopes and slowing that down and making it a gentler transition for the water to get to the stream. And grasses, you typically see them either in the sort of margins of the active channel or actually in the floodplain themselves, because the floodplain, it gets flooded frequently. And so it prevents, you know, lots of really sturdy woody shrubs from establishing. So that's just an overview of how vegetation interacts with the stream channel and some of the species and what the kind of look that you see. You also notice that on the left bank here, we're showing very dense vegetation. And on the right bank, we're showing vegetation that has more sightline and visibility through it. Both can be designed and both can be effective in protecting your stream banks. We just want to make sure that we're creating adequate shade for the stream channel and that we're giving enough room for the vegetation to secure the banks and play a role in bioengineering. Moving on from that, there's also compatible activities within the different zones of the creek. And this is something where we really think it'll be exciting to think about with respect to Calder Creek at Ives Park. This is not meant to be a representation of what happens at Ives. This is just an example that shows that where you have regular flooding, you know, obviously, if it's a small creek, maybe you won't have boating, but you might have fishing or other kinds of activities, bird watching in this zone. And then as you move further out, you could have trails that people are using. You can have kids playing on the margins of these areas when it's not flooded, of course. And then as you move further out where it's infrequently flooded and it's dry most of the time, you might be able to accommodate some sports fields or activities that can tolerate and recover pretty well from flooding. And then you get further out and, you know, the sort of rare areas, all uses apply. And that's meant to really help to shape how we think about what the creek can be adjacent to, or if we're trying to create a floodplain area, reconnecting a floodplain to the creek, what activities and uses might be appropriate. So with that, I'm going to transition now to just a slide looking at the master plan and would like to open it up to your questions and comments. If you have any questions about what Riley was talking about or about our goals, or if you have specific reflections for us about the master plan and the creek coming through the park, we would love to be able to get that input so that as we're developing alternatives for the park, we can take that into consideration.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So we'll start with questions from planning commissioners. Planning commissioners have questions of Ann and Riley at this point. Everett, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for all the information, and I love the Halloween theme, so thank you for that. So you mentioned blackberries is one of the shrubs, and as you get closer to, you go to the redwood forest there, it's just overgrown with blackberry. Does that, it does help for stabilization, but then it keeps, I guess, people away, or just wondering what your take is on comments are about that type of vegetation?
Okay, thank you for asking about that. So first of all, what we were showing are sort of typical native shrubs, and it doesn't mean that that has to be the one that gets used in our design. But blackberry, the native blackberry, a lot of what you see at the railroad forest is the non-native Himalayan blackberry. It has a thicker cane and meaner spines on it. But both are a pretty effective ground cover, and they do play a role in erosion control. Our reference to it was primarily ecological and in terms of how it supports the stream function. The selection of the vegetation to be used really does need to relate also to how humans engage with it and what is wanted and needed.
So the native blackberry is totally different than the Himalayan blackberry. It's not this horrible invasive plant. As a matter of fact, when we advise homeowners what to do when they tear out ivy or Himalayan blackberry, what to replace the invasives with, we'll recommend native blackberry because it's a very benign plant. And it's really a tough plant that can compete against these invasive plants.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And, you know, we talked about how the creek restoration and, you know, fits in with the master plan and so forth. Do you think that you could, or would you design or give your opinion, let's say there was no master plan and you would just go through and do what would be best or what you think would be best, how that would look, regardless of what, you know, the master plan shows, kind of as a reference point? Is that kind of something that you're might be doing as well as, you know, trying to incorporate with the master plan?
We're preparing several alternatives, and one of them certainly could be based on that approach.
Yeah,
our main concern was to be sensitive to work that had already been done and not be duplicative. So that was a concern of ours, but we're happy to do one of the alternatives in that
yeah,
way.
I mean, I would just like to know what would be the ideal, like what should it be, and then work from there to say, okay, well, you know, what do we want to save and so forth. So from my viewpoint, I'd like to see what naturally it would be without any of the other constraints.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's all I have for now.
Thanks. Deborah, you're muted.
I keep muting myself when I'm not talking. So just really quickly to follow up on the blackberries, and you know, I understand the Himalayan blackberries are very different, but we do have a problem in Sebastopol, which is actually getting worse with climate change and drought, with having poison oak kind of overrun our you know, natural habitats. And so our walking path now is basically blackberries and poison oak. And I hear from a lot of parents in town that kids will often get in their pets and it becomes an issue. So with the native blackberries, do you have the same issue with poison oak tandemly growing with it, or what is your, you know, is there any poison oak plan?
You know, we're not planning on planting poison oak along Calder.
It doesn't get planted.
I can tell you that.
It appears itself.
Yeah, we're not that evil.
We're not that radical.
Yeah, you know, 9-bark as a ground cover does really well. Blackberry, I mean, we're just throwing out some plants that are common ground covers that are native. They can help compete against the kinds of ground cover you don't want. But I'm not seeing that we're going to be setting up conditions here for poison oak to invade this creek corridor.
I just hear so many Sebastopol parents finding less and less places here where their kids can kind of play safely, because it's just so, it just takes over. So I know blackberries are one habitat that it really enjoy. So just putting that out there to you and you're thinking about the vegetation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I would just add that there are, you know, strategies like mass plantings of native understory plants and grasses that can help act as barriers and buffers between trails and walking ways and some of the interior species. So that's another thing we can look at as we're moving forward with this.
Yeah, and then also just lastly, safety issues for, you know, both adults and children near the creek once it's, you know, transformed. Right now, there's actual fencing there, but, you know, I notice a lot of the images we see are more inviting, which is great, but also I wonder about kind of like, you know, liabilities or, you know, especially with when the waters are high or whatnot. So is that addressed in the plan as well?
Well, I think we have some options, and you know, the overall concept that we're doing is really about how the stream alignment will work with the park elements, and whether or not you want some fencing, even if like it was a low split rail fence or whatever it could be, those can be added, and it can certainly be an add alternate item when you're submitting your grants looking for funding.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think we're first addressing how unsafe the existing conditions are. Where you've got a trapezoidal channel or a rectangular channel and the water's really deep and it's going really fast. And so we want to address that basic safety problem and allow the water to spread out some on a floodplain, allow the water to interact with vegetation. And then that means your velocities go way down. Our creek isn't going to be as deep. You know, in terms of that trapezoidal depth that you have, like you have a 15 or 12 foot deep creek, our active channel that's going to be meandering through is probably going to be more like 15 feet wide and 1 or 2 feet deep. So we're really going to change the liability factor in the way this new creek is going to behave.
Kathy.
Yes, I'd like to reiterate Ernesto Everett Fernandez's vision of running the creek that you think should be here versus what's in the master plan for the park. Some of the other things that some of us have talked about regarding creek restoration and this master plan is that we think that the children's playground should really remain where it is on the east side, because there are bathrooms closer to it, and we don't expect the bathrooms to be publicly available on the west side. Another thought was that many of us really do like the redwood trees that are running along the creek where it's channelized, and the thought was that could remain there. And there doesn't, while I would like the park to be extended at Willow and Jewel, the costs of that, especially with the infrastructure under there, doesn't seem to be a very good trade-off for what we could get unless it were, in this case, part of a creek restoration, and that it made sense. So that's just my take on some of the things that some of us are thinking might be different from this master plan that we have now. Another thing that occurs to me is if you're widening the creek on the east side from High Street, that would be nice, because I would love all of the fencing to be down if that's possible, except for maybe the low curb fencing, you know, to keep bikes and strollers from falling in. So I would be really open to that. On the other hand, if that can't be done, I'd be open to channelizing that east side as well into beginning the park space. If that's an appropriate solution to what the water needs to pass through. I don't know if those two things are compatible. As for the plantings, I'll just mention that if you've looked at the Laguna Uplands Park, which is at the end of Palm Avenue, there are some areas there where there is drainage and a small amount of water coming down into a swale, and it's completely it's vegetated with some sort of bunch grasses and sedges, and interspersed with some trees, willows and alders probably. And I think it's a kind of a nice look, except for the fact that it'd be nice to have some small pathways that people could use to get down to the water. But I think that kind of an approach would be useful in the park as well, that it could look something like that.
Can you repeat what that location is at the end of what?
Yes, at the end of Palm Avenue.
Palm Avenue.
There's a little trail that goes down to the Laguna Uplands Preserve.
Okay.
It's an area that was saved and has been replanted. And I have some email communications I could share with you. Maybe I already did, from the naturalist who actually planted those areas. But when I was walking there, I could envision something that looked like that swale or that ravine in the park, and that it would be easy to maintain as well.
Great, thank you.
And for now, that's all I can think of, but I'm sure something else will come up.
That's great.
Zach or Linda, do you have any questions or initial comments? Not hearing them. I will.
Not me, thank you.
Sure. I was just gonna say, I also agree that I would like to see, an alternate that was just kind of open-ended and not necessarily constrained by the master plan. Obviously, the master plan had a component of naturalizing the creek, but also the master plan does put a lot of constraints on your work, and I would be interested in, if it seems to make sense to do something different that would require a change in the master plan, I would be happy to take a look at changing the master plan to accommodate this. And that, for me, would include, because we've talked about this a lot in the planning commission, is the Little League field. Does that Little League field takes up, look at that. Look how much, area of the park is occupied by the Little League field. There are other baseball fields in town. Is that one absolutely necessary? I'm sure that would be a big deal to get rid of, but it's a sizable portion of the park, and not very many people get to use it. So I would think that I would like to see, kind of what, none of these other constraints, what could possibly happen. But also keeping in mind that this is a park, we do want other activities, not just a creek as well. So kind of balancing it, but I'm sure you guys can understand that concept.
Sure.
Yeah. And I'll just add that, over the weekend, when it was raining, and I did take a walk through the park, and it was very interesting to see how quickly, the water is moving through those concrete channels. And then when it gets to the grassy area, it totally slows down. And I can very much see what you're saying, that area, it's sort of spread out, it had room to spread out, and it slows down, and then it goes over that weir and just takes off again into that channel. And it was a very interesting kind of contrast to see those two different environments and how the creek behaved. Because if a kid fell into where that water was moving that fast, they would be gone. There would be no stopping them. But if they fell into that slow moving area, you could jump, go and grab them and get them out of there. But once they go over that weir, there's no stopping them.
Right.
So I could appreciate that, your previous comment about that, kind of slowing it down and making it taking some of the liability away. I could see that making sense. So now I will open this up to members of the public. If you'd like to speak, make yourselves known, and you will have 3 minutes. And I will start with Lynn Diedler. If you want to unmute yourself, Lynn.
Yeah.
Can you see the timer, Lynn? We have a 3-minute timer.
Oh, I'll need the timer.
Okay. I don't know where the timer is. I don't see it myself, but.
Anyway, you can stop me whenever.
Okay.
I just want to piggyback on a few of the comments here that I think this master plan is seriously in need of a relook. It was approved the night it was presented, and the public was there with, just had it presented to them and kind of slightly overwhelmed with no time to think about it. It got voted on and now it was a done deal. There's a lot of problems with it. You brought up the need for having the ballpark in Ives Field. I hope that the Planning Commission will really take a look at that question and study it. I have a little bit, and before I make any comments about it, I'm all for the Little League. I think it's a great institution. They're doing a really good job, and nothing against them, but it does take up 1/3 of a very small park. You add Ives Pool to that, and you've got a exceptionally small park in the dead center of town where you should have a jewel of a park, a centerpiece for our town. And so, and just looking at that a little bit, as far as the need for the ball field in Ives Park, the city has 3 exclusive agreements with the Little League where they get a lock and key on 3 really nice parks in this town. No other town in Sonoma County has near that. Even big towns where big time baseball is played, like Petaluma, doesn't have such a deal. And none of them are, only 2 of them outside of Ives Park are locked up in this county. Plus, this city has plenty of ball fields. It has 12. That is per capita 5 times the average of the rest of the county. It's 10 times as many ball fields per capita as Santa Rosa. And we have in those 12 public ball fields, ones that are not used, that could be used by the Little League. And so that would open up the creek to be meandering widely and be restored all the way through. Next thing, if I got another minute, is
10 seconds, Lynn.
Okay, including the island and between Willow and Jewel would allow you to extend the creek up to where people can see it. You could add 75 feet to the creek and open it up. And the whole neighborhood around there would love to see it. It would add such a lot to the whole feel of the center of the town and the park. Stop.
Yep. Thank you, Lynn.
Hey, let me add one thing that should be known too, is I just happened to talk to a neighbor who was weeding there, and then we started discussing the adding of that corner to the park. She was so for it. She said, I'll go the first $10,000. And if you need more, we'll talk.
Thanks, Lynn. We'll contact you. Anyone else like to speak? Joan, please, there you go.
Yeah, thanks. I forgot my husband, Jeffrey Skinner, with me as well. All I wanted to say was I'm grateful to see this process going forward. Thank you to Riley and Jessica for the presentation. Jeffrey and I and a few, well, Lynn and others have been thinking about this creek and naturalizing the creek through the park for a decade or so, or we started thinking about it a decade or so ago. And so we're thrilled to see this moving forward. And yeah, would love to stay posted on the process. I'd be interested to hear what the next steps are. I imagine you planning commissioner folks know what those are, but I didn't catch that if that was covered. And I'm a vegetation ecologist by trade, and I work with a firm that does a lot of stream restoration. And so just would love to follow the plans as they develop, and certainly can provide input on local vegetation that would be suitable for the plantings as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else like to make a comment? Okay, and seeing nobody else, I will close the public hearing. And so Carrie, could you speak to Joan's question about the next steps? Just let everyone know.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And and just so everyone knows, we have created a flyer. It will be up. We've actually updated if you go to the planning department and go to the parks planning page, we have the dates and some of the links to those to the upcoming meetings. And I'll let Jessica speak a little bit further to this, but this is kind of the first step for WRI and to get sort of input on what you all want to see as the community in terms of input on and our Parks Commission, of course. We actually have a project meeting tomorrow with WRI, Dante from Public Works, and GHD to take this, sort of process it and talk about some direction. Jessica and Riley will then be developing some design alternatives. So mark your calendar. They're scheduled to return to the Planning Commission on December 14th to present those design alternatives. And then from that, and I will say, if we get into redoing the entire master plan, we will need to check in with council first. But otherwise, if it's generally aligned with the master plan, our city council knows that there may be some adjustments based on the constraints and the design of the creek. If it's so major that huge elements like ball fields and stuff are coming out, we will definitely want to go to them first before we have Jessica and Riley do a lot of work on developing the preferred alternative to make sure that, whatever that design concept is, makes sense. But they will then be developing from the design alternatives presentation on December 14th and feedback from the Planning Commission. They will then be developing a concept plan. And GHD is working on the hydrology study and making sure that the stormwater components of it are all coordinated in with Jessica and Riley's work. So right now we're tentatively have a scheduled meeting to come back in January to the Planning Commission with the preferred concept, and then we would take that to City Council to present to them.
Carrie, can I also just interrupt to give a shout out to Jeremy Svela for being on the call tonight. I used to work with him at GHD and have great respect for him and his work, and I'm excited that he's working with Sebastopol on this, and look forward to talking to you tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Is there any other additional feedback from any commissioners? Any final thoughts? Or go ahead, Everett.
Thank you. First of all, Carrie, unless I maybe was doing it wrong, I went to the city site and I tried the links for the master plan, and it sent me to a couple of error pages. So I happen to have one stored up, but I even tried searching on the city page. So I'm not sure if it was operator error or if it just needs to be updated.
So Thank you, Everett. So I just posted in the chat the link to the planning department park planning page. And actually, Everett, I actually downloaded both the report and the diagram just now, so I had them at ready access for the meeting. They did work, so I think that might have been just a computer error on your side.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure about that. Yeah, you know, the master plan is coming up on 9 years old, and you know, a lot of things have changed. You know, I feel the same way as some of the other commissioners that you know, to direct or plan the creek around the master plan at this point, my opinion is like the tail wagging the dog, so to speak. You know, so I think we need to look at, you know, what is possible. I think as a park commission, then perhaps we may recommend to look at that again, and look at some of the strategies and what, you know, what was planned. But I think that a lot of that stuff that is there, and I've gotten comments and stuff that it just doesn't seem to fit in or work. So, and you know, for example, and I echo Lynn Diedler's comments as well. Great respect for the Little League and everything that they've done. But if you were able to use that space for you know, concerts and music area, that frees up a lot of the other space that was kind of planned for that. And when that was one of the reasons they were talking about removing some of those redwood trees and paving over part of the creek there was to extend the area where people can kind of, you know, be there to enjoy that part of it. So, you know, I just wanted to iterate, that's kind of my feeling on it. I'm not sure others agree, but I think it's something we need to take a look at and, you know, look at it as planning. So, you know, take that into consideration. You know, we're not going to have you do a bunch of work for that, but again, I'd like to hear and see, this is what the possibilities without constraints on, and then kind of we can see then when you're talking about other alternatives, what kind of mitigations you did, what changed, the flow, and you know, that's the type of thing to then incorporate. And Jessica and Riley, I really appreciate all the work that you've done. We're really blessed to have you guys doing this and helping us move forward, and everybody else has been involved, and Carrie and jumping in and so forth. So really appreciate this effort and the fact that we're moving forward instead of another 20 years. I'm sure we would have been talking about it. So thank you very much for everything you guys have done.
Yeah, and I'd like to just kind of reiterate that. I mean, when this master plan was done, I wasn't on the commission, so I don't know how much of it thought went into the kind of naturalization of the creek. Obviously it was discussed and it was a component of the plan, but I can just see it really being, you know, the driver for a new Ives Park in a lot of ways. You know, it's such a unique, great feature, or it could be a great feature of the park, that I would love to see it, you know, really trying to capitalize it on that, and then possibly building the rest of the master plan, and, you know, adapting to that rather than trying to, again, kind of cram this creek, which is what it feels like it is now. It's like, oh, this creek got kind of crammed into this park. I hate to see us do this whole exercise only to have this creek feel like it was kind of crammed into this park again. It would be nice to feel like there's this great creek here and we designed a park around it. Wasn't that cool? We took advantage of that rather than, yeah, kind of forcing the park around this kind of forced creek. I totally agree. And that may be obviously a longer process. We might not be able to get to the concept plan right away if we have to go back and revisit the master plan, and you know, but I think we should try to, you know, we have this opportunity, we should really try to get it right, and not we're not going to have this chance for a long time again, if ever. So any other final thoughts from commissioners? Carrie, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, maybe I should have actually said this during public comment, but it's actually a question, and that is just in terms of when you did the first presentation, Jessica and Riley, you did talk about sort of the outside of Ives Park part of it, and I found your presentation today with the what not to do, the Halloween Hollow stories, very interesting. And I wonder are some of those steps and those best practices or those things not to do, are they applicable to people who are either upstream or downstream, or frankly even on a small drainage channel that's not Calder Creek but just a drainage channel? And is that something that you could help or guide the city to sort of best practices? And I do have a personal interest because I have drainage soil in my backyard that is a couple feet deep and a few feet wide. It's not a big deal, but I kind of want, I was kind of wondering, it's like, oh, I can make that look like a dry creek bed. But now I'm wondering, well, maybe that's not the right thing to do. And it would just, I think it'd be helpful for just the average homeowner person, but certainly those who do own property along Calder Creek in terms of what they should or shouldn't be doing. I think I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'll send you a publication published by the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board back in 2003. I'll just send the PDF, and it's intended to cover these do's and don'ts. The San Francisco Bay Regional Board also has a newer publication out, basically do's and don'ts if you're trying to design a flood control project. So I'll send you both of those. But the first one is really good for property owners. I'm trying to think. I think didn't Prudensky Chatham produce something for property owners in Sonoma County on how to manage your creeks like way back in the 90s?
I'm going to ask Joan, who worked for Princess Chatham, to answer that question.
Yeah, we did. Well, it was before my time at Prudensky Chatham, but yeah, groundwork, a little.
Yeah, groundwork.
Yeah, Carrie, I can get you a copy.
Okay, and if any of this stuff is available as sort of a web link as well, like regional water, that's something that we can certainly look at and post on our website as well to just provide information to the public. I think that might be, as we head into the rainy season, interesting for people to think about.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, Carrie, because most of our creeks are not on public property. Most of the creeks in town are on private property, and people probably do really bad things when a creek is on their property. So it'd be good to have some best practices that are, easily available to residents. Everett?
Yeah,
Joan,
same thing.
Can you email the address you see for me up here and let me know how to reach you? Okay.
Go ahead, Everett.
Yeah, just I appreciate that comment as well. And, I think maybe should consider going further than just providing information, and maybe the city might want to come up with a plan as to how creeks should be taken care of, just like zero waste that we're recommending to different businesses and so forth. So rather than just recommendation, I'd kind of like to see it go a little farther than that, and also be able to offer assistance to these property owners to do the right thing, and what can be done, and because it's it affects everyone, and access maybe needs to be done to those creeks and looked at, and seeing what's there, and how it needs to be managed. But I think we just want to keep that in mind, and maybe it might be something the Planning Commission may recommend that the City Council kind of take a look at.
Thank you, Commissioner Fernandez. And I've actually spoken with both Jessica and Riley already about, our current creek ordinance is very much from the 80s or 90 era, when it really is concerned about the localized flooding from a FEMA perspective of not building buildings within 30 feet of the top of the bank of a creek. But what I've experienced, and many of you know, I used to work for the city of Mill Valley. Well, Mill Valley has 3 major creeks that run through it, had the same exact ordinance basically. And we were running into problems like, well, sometimes people would build a hot tub in the creek, but that was clearly not allowed. But we didn't have any regulations in terms of building decks or paving or, pressure treated wood right up on the banks of the creek, those types of things. And we don't have that. It's the same exact regulation in Sebastopol. We don't have anything in terms of what you should actually, other than don't build a structure within that requires a building permit within that top 30 foot from top of bank regulation. We don't have any best practices. So I've actually already talked with Jessica and Riley about, hey, maybe one of the other things that comes out of this is we put on the planning commission work plan to update our creek ordinance to address some of those issues.
Right. Kathy?
Yes, thank you. Something you said, Paul, about we don't do this very often. We should really take the time to take a good look at it. It reminds me that someone planted a little thought into my brain when I was talking about the park to say that Calder Creek goes all the way down to the railroad forest, and there is an instinct to daylight things. And I can hardly imagine crossing 2 highways and running through 2 blocks, but I don't know how much time the designers want to think about that. But if you're thinking about an alternative, I just can't not mention that that's also a possibility. And who knows whether you can get more money to do all that than you can just to do a little park as part of it. Maybe there's more money in that than there is in fixing the park. So I just wanted to say that. And reading through the hazard mitigation document that we were just looking at, they mentioned daylighting creeks. So I'm just putting all those things together and throwing it into your basket of concepts. Because we just can't not acknowledge, like Paul said, we got one chance to do it in our lifetimes. We might as well at least think about it. So thank you.
It's definitely something that we're talking about as thinking about that connection from the creek park down to the forest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Deborah.
I'm muted. I just wanted to say thank you so much to all the commissioners who brought up I really think it makes sense to just walk before we run and look at the bigger picture, because again, it really resonated with me, like this is our chance. So let's do it right. Let's not try to push it into what's there now, but what it potentially could be. So thank you. I think that's just right on point.
Thanks. Everett?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, if it's appropriate, when you're doing a walk or a tour or, kind of getting together, if you could put the word out. I know that, certain commission, we have all the Brown Act rules, but, I'd like to know some of those things. I'd be interested just, to follow along and just listen to kind of some of the conversations, what you're looking at, and your strategies and so forth. So if you just put that information out, if it's okay with you guys, I'd be interested in hearing more about it.
Great, will do.
Yeah, and I read that maybe something where we pull in the Ice Park Subcommittee, which is yourself and Kathy as Planning Commission recommends, to get a little bit more information and just feedback as well.
Yep.
Okay, anyone else? Final comments? All right, well, great. Well, thank you so much, Riley and Jessica. We look forward to December 14th and what you come up with. And yeah, super excited about this process. Thanks for helping us out.
Yeah, we're excited too.
Thank you so much.
Right. So I think we have a couple more agenda items, subcommittee updates. Anyone have anything to report about a subcommittee? Everett?
Yes, so the zero waste subcommittee, one of the things we talked about and are doing is people on the committee have volunteered to go visit or to order takeout from restaurants and just to kind of observe what is it that they're providing. And it's not to go back and penalize them or anything like that. It's just to be helpful to them Things such as when you go to pick up your food to go, they're supposed to ask if you want utensils or packets of condiments and so forth, rather than just automatically put them in. So just those types of things that they may not know, because this ordinance is coming up. So we are doing that and putting information in a spreadsheet. And then the idea is that we kind of report back on our observation, and then they'll contact the restaurant again and again to help them to say, hey, this is this ordinance coming along, and this is kind of how it's supposed to be operated. Here's the what needs to be done, and how they can help, what alternatives they have. There's even some grant money a little bit available, but what can be done that they can charge another 10 cents for certain things, and credit people bring their own containers, that type of thing. So that's something that we're looking at, and it's a project that I can report on how we're doing the next meeting.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have anything to report? All right, then how about Carrie, a planning director's report?
Sure, a few things going on of interest to the commission. There's probably more things that I know about, but here's the things that I'd like to share. So our housing element, we've had a couple of project meetings after the kickoff. They're doing a lot of information gathering and reviewing, getting ready to do community engagement. We do have on the planning department webpage, if you go, it's sort of got the Brady Bunch squares of quick links. We have a new one specifically for the housing element. And there is, so there's an email if you know someone who wants to know about the meetings and is interested in participating. They can send an email, and that'll get to both Associate Planner John Jay, as well as the outreach person at Four Leaf, to make sure they're notified of future meetings on the list. They're more also important right now. There is a survey of housing issues in Sebastopol that is up, and it will be up through I think through the November 10th is the end date on that. It is available in both English and Spanish, and so we definitely want to get a lot of participation there. If you're I can send the link directly to the commission as well. And then if you know of folks or groups that we will be sending it to, we actually had a meeting this morning, and so we'll be sending it to things like the schools to, so trying to get as broad and participation as possible. And so I was going, well, public school, my dad was a school teacher. So public schools, that's a pretty fair, you only get people with kids, but you get the whole range. Some of the churches and whatnot, but certainly you all have a great ties to the community, and I would appreciate your help getting the word out on that. We do also have at City Council's last meeting, they did two things. One, they approved the 6 sculptures for the Ives Park Sculpture Park. So that is getting up and running at our next meeting, November, next Wednesday. We'll be reviewing and discussing which art piece goes where. We will be starting off actually with a discussion of the Upcycle Art project that the Zero Waste and Climate Action subcommittees are working on for the first 15 minutes. And then we'll be working on selecting locations so that we can, staff can coordinate getting those sculptures up. And I think the PAC will also be doing a little grand opening party planning on that, so that we can celebrate that once it's in. Let's see, the City Council also announced all the openings for the various city boards and commissions. We do have 2 openings on the Planning Commission, and one of those, and I'll let Zach say a few words if he wants, but Zach has announced that he is going to resign effective the end of this year. And so Zach, go ahead.
Thanks, Carrie. Yes, thank you for bringing this up. I just have, as you know, it's been taxing to be as engaged as I would like to be with the commission. I've been on boards in the city for about 15 years, and the last year or so has been probably as hard as it has ever been just to juggle all the activities with running a business, my other volunteer activities with the Red Cross and the Commission. So I made the decision that I would give up this position in the hopes that someone who has a little more capacity and can really engage fully, as I would expect of myself, will be able to do so. So, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank you all. Some of you I've served on boards with for a very long time, others more recently. But the work we do is so important, and I really appreciate each and every one of you and your attention and dedication to the city. So thanks so much.
And so on that, the Planning Commission will have 2 openings available. That is from either a resident or a business owner within the city. Either of those is fine. We have 2 openings on our Climate Action Committee. One is for the environmental justice representative and one is for the youth representative. And then we have 3 openings on our design review board. Those are 2-year terms, so they're shorter than the Planning Commission. So we always have some term up. And that includes 2 sitting members. I know at least one of them is planning on reapplying, as well as a vacancy that we have right now for an open general community member. So if you know of someone in that light who may be interested, that would be great. And then we have a couple of openings on our public art committee. And I don't yet know, obviously if we have folks reapplying for that or not. And then on the zero waste subcommittee, the openings are for a commercial entity, a citizen representative, and the youth alternate. And so I will post that link if you would like to the chat right now, so you can share that. I'll also send that out via email. And then the City Council does have a special meeting tomorrow night at 6:30. It's a single agenda item, and that is to discuss a potential pilot project for safe 24/7 RV parking. So that agenda just it's a special meeting just because of the timing of things. And that agenda was just, and staff report was just posted today. The special meeting is tomorrow, and we're anticipating they will be doing some follow-up at their next meeting next Tuesday as well. And that is from the Committee for the Unhoused, the City Council Subcommittee, bringing that forward. And then I have sent some communications regarding the upcoming Huntley Square 10-unit townhome development to the Commission. If you do have any questions about protocols or anything like that, I know a number of the folks from the development to the east have given permission to the Planning Commission to enter their property to see the site from their perspective, if you want. And I think I sent out sort of the standard protocols for engaging with the public via email. But if you have any questions, definitely, especially our newer commissioners who haven't necessarily been through a public process like this before, public hearing process, please do let me know. And that will be upcoming at your next Planning Commission meeting on the 9th. So.
Yeah, Carrie, could you maybe just, because I actually would like to at least visit the property. Could you talk about so there was someone that is there that was willing to meet? Is that correct? Someone that. So
we have had 2 or 3 residents, and I can make sure you've got all those contacts who were interested in having the commissioners come and look. So as planning commissioners, you are able to, discuss, it's called ex parte communication. So there's certain regulations around it. You can certainly discuss, ask questions, or listen and ask questions of members of the public. It's best practice, certainly never to talk about your own perspectives. That's something that needs to be held for a public hearing process. You can ask them questions about some of the things they're discussing. If you don't feel comfortable engaging, I know I've dealt with commissioners who both are fine doing that. And then when we do get to the hearing, you should disclose that you met and talked with either the applicant, if you did a site visit with the applicant, or the member of the public, just so it is clear on the public record. And then if you don't feel comfortable as well, I have certainly had commissioners who said, yeah, I'm just here to look at the site, I'm reading materials, I want to engage with the public through the public hearing process and forum that is available there, and that is also perfectly okay. And I've let the applicant and the adjoining property owners know that there may be some commissioners who want to come on the site but don't necessarily want to engage. Is that okay? And they said, yeah, that's fine too. So, and you can just let them know that I'm here to look at the site. Thank you for letting me come out, but I do want to wait until the public hearing or reviewing the public comments.
Is there any, if there's several people that are interested or available, would it be best to do that all at once, do you think? Or is there any reason to meet with them individually, or?
That's up to you. It's often a little easier to not make it feel like a meeting if it's more on an individual basis. Yeah. That said, the applicants are having a neighborhood meeting this Saturday at 2 at the site. If you wanted to come, and I can send the flyer out for that, if you do want to come and just listen to the discussion, that's maybe a good time and place if they're available for that to do that. Again, please just don't talk about your opinion or discuss the project in any detail that would compromise the hearing process.
Carrie, am I accurate in thinking that if more than 3 commissioners were there, that wouldn't work on Saturday?
I believe it's okay if you are just listening and not saying a word. However, let me run that, because it doesn't usually happen where there's a neighborhood meeting at this part of the process. I will check with the city attorney and get back to you all on that.
I'd be a little concerned of the optics if there's a large group of commissioners at a neighborhood, meeting regarding the project. I think we should be a little bit cautious of that.
Yeah, and I would, if the city attorney says it's okay, I would ask that, and I'll be there, so I will be able to say, nah. Please don't say a word, just listen, if you do attend that meeting.
Yeah, and I know council has done that for other things where they've just shown up, they haven't said anything, they've just observed. So I know that, I think it's possible that way.
Yeah, and like I said, I'll be there and I can explain that, our commissioners are here to listen, but they cannot talk. They're here to listen and observe, and they will have their discussions next Tuesday or in a couple of weeks at the hearing.
Bring a big ruler so you can, smash it.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions of Carrie? Go ahead, Everett.
Actually, I just, I don't know how many more meetings Zach has or going to line up or have an opportunity, but I just want to tell him we worked together many years on the commission, and like all the commissioners, I haven't always seen eye to eye, but I always respected your opinion, knew where you came from, you felt that it was genuine and that you stood your ground, and really appreciate the comments and facts that you've come in different ways to make us think about things. And then your background, design, being on the design review board, gave us kind of a different look and so forth. So I, for one, will miss you on that commission and really appreciate your service, and thank you for having served as long as you have, and wish you well. And hopefully you hear something coming up the commission and you have some comments to make. So we'll see and hear from you then as well.
Thank you, Everett. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I appreciate you being here, and I'm sad to see you go, but I also appreciate you recognizing your limitations. And we can't all do everything all the time, and 15 years on city boards and commissions is quite a record. So you've done your time for sure. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right, and I think that unless anyone has anything else to add, that will do it for tonight. So I will see you all our next meeting on November 9th.
Great.
Thanks.